Here's a story, folks. Biden says key elements of a Gaza deal are on the table as he meets with Jordan's King Abdullah. This is a good story. Declaring that every innocent life lost in Gaza is a tragedy, President Joe Biden welcomed Jordan's King Abdullah II to the White House on Monday for talks on how to end the months-long war and plan for what comes afterward. The meeting with Abdullah comes as Biden and his aides are working to broker another pause in Israel's war against Hamas in order to send humanitarian aid and supplies into the region and get hostages out. The White House faces growing criticism from Arab Americans over the administration's continued support for Israel in the face of rising casualties in Gaza since Hamas launched its October 7th attack on Israel. The key elements of the deal are on the table, Biden said alongside the king, though there are gaps that remain. He said the U.S. would do, quote, everything possible to make an agreement happen, a pause to fighting for at least 6 weeks, and the release of the remaining hostages held by Hamas. By the way, those hostages were all offered up in a previous deal, which Netanyahu rejected. We'll get to that later in the show. A senior U.S. administration official said Sunday that after weeks of shuttle diplomacy and phone conversations, a framework was essentially in place for a deal. The official said Israeli military pressure on Hamas and Khan Yunis over the last several weeks has helped bring the militant group closer to accepting an agreement. Abdullah said Biden's leadership was, quote, key to addressing this conflict as he raised the plight of the tens of thousands of civilians killed and wounded in the fighting. We need a lasting ceasefire now, the king said. This war must end. Jordan and other Arab states have been highly critical of Israel's actions and have eschewed public support for long-term planning over what happens next, arguing that the fighting must end before such discussions can begin. They have been demanding a ceasefire since mid-October as civilian casualties began to skyrocket. Pretty benign write-up from the Associated Press. Here's what this press conference looked like in real time as it was happening. You might say the King of Jordan dragged Joe Biden. Really showed him up on stage. You could see the president. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, this is how a lot of media deception works, because that article was not factually inaccurate, but the framing was completely off. They described it as if they had a meeting and they had a speech and they were on the same page. An accurate framing would be King trolls President Biden, who has no choice but to nod and shuffle feet nervously.
Yes, Biden squirms as King of Jordan dismantles Israel. Here's how that actually looked.
Today carries an added meaning, as our countries this year mark 75 years of exemplary strategic partnership. However, we had hoped we would be marking this major milestone during better circumstances in my region and the world. Unfortunately, one of the most devastating wars in recent history continues to unfold in Gaza as we speak. Nearly 100,000 people have been killed, injured, or are missing. The majority are women and children. We cannot afford an Israeli attack on Rafah. It is certain to produce another humanitarian catastrophe. The situation is already unbearable for over 1 million people who have been pushed into Rafah since the war started.
Keep in mind, this was on Monday, so this was the day after Israel launched what's been called online the Super Bowl massacre, where they did those airstrikes that killed at least 67 people, if not far more, would be my suspicion, since a lot of people are still missing as a result of that. But this is after the airstrikes on Rafah. Don't forget, Israel is still planning a ground invasion. And so he keeps going.
We cannot stand by and let this continue. We need a lasting ceasefire now. This war must end.
Here comes the tell. Yeah, finger to the face.
We must urgently and immediately
the uncomfortable.
ensure the sustainable delivery
next
of sufficient aid to Gaza through all possible entry points and mechanisms. And I thank you.
It's like, I should have doubled up on my depends before this.
Restrictions on vital relief aid and medical items are leading to inhumane conditions. No other UN agency can do what UNRWA is doing.
Look at this now.
In helping the people of Gaza through this humanitarian catastrophe. Its work in other areas of operation, especially in Jordan, where 2.3 million are registered, is also vital. It is imperative that UNRWA continues to receive the support it needs to carry out its mandate. The potential threat of Palestinian displacement beyond the borders of Gaza and the West Bank is something we view with extreme concern and cannot be allowed.
You talk about, really making them squirm. They're bringing up the UNRWA defunding with the president on the stage. That's what made this so effective. Like, he just takes the mic and is like, all right, I'm just going to say exactly what I feel, and I'm going to make him stand there and watch the whole thing. Really, really well done.
And not only that, to add insult to injury, he learned English in an American accent.
Yes.
Really driving it in. Not it can't even dismiss him as a half a limey.
Yeah, exactly. That goes on for 6 minutes. We don't have to play the whole thing, but I encourage you to find that video online. But really, really well done. I mean, that's how you do it. You don't waste an opportunity. But yeah, if you look at the AP, how they wrote it up, it sounded like, they had a meeting, they exchanged some ideas, they negotiated, there was a back and forth, we're making progress, but we still have, room to work with. We still have lots of ground to make up. Really, that guy just comes and lays out the case against Israel and the case against defunding the UN Relief and Works Agency, which America did immediately at Israel's order. Immediately. Less than 48 hours between when Israel came to them and said, hey, we have a complaint, to when, we'll shut that funding down. Really important for him to get that in also.
Well, you can just see, as in the science fiction classic Flash Gordon of 1980, everyone wants to rebel against Ming. They're just waiting for the opportune moment. You have all of the different tribes. The king of Jordan in this situation is Voltan, the leader of the Hawkmen. He's just waiting for the moment when he thinks Ming can be overthrown.
Right.
Like, that's what's going on in that speech. And what's also going on in that speech is they're starting to not be as afraid of the bully in the neighborhood.
Right.
They would not have made a speech like that standing next to the American president 30 years ago.
No, in Washington, D.C.,
right.
on the Americans' home turf. Exactly.
Yes.
Please clap.